So we're going to talk about small business realities right now. So I've got a great panel. Bob Braun. Bob and I actually may have written the very first paper that moves along that, what's the North Star of reasonable standards, when we talked about standards of care back in, what was it, 2005, I think. Mike was the editor of a law journal, and you and I had that paper.
Right.
In that. Jason with Greenlight Cyber, part of this, our first IT MSP cohort. Scott, Clark Hill. Yep. New firm, so it takes a while to connect in. And then remotely, Lessie, Skiba from the Cyber Readiness Institute. We're all local LA. Lessie has a global perspective of the challenges of small businesses, and she'll bring that in as well. Let me start, Bob, with you, and it's also a question for you as well, Scott. What brings clients into the door? You know, what brings them into the room? What when they call you, what's on their mind? And Bob, jump in with kind of what that looks like.
Well, they come in, nobody walks into my door to do any kind of privacy work for the heck of it. They do it because their insurance company, they have a checklist. I mean, they have no idea what to do with it. Or they're getting a loan and they don't have any idea what to do with it. We have a big M&A practice at our firm, and so a lot of times our clients are being bought, and there is a whole due diligence section on secure privacy and security, and they come to that. And of course, they come to us after the fact. They come to us when there's been a breach, and as I said, in all those cases, I mean, no one does this actually voluntarily. Mm-hmm. People do this because they really have no choice. So, which actually for a lawyer is a great thing. You know, when you don't have a choice, that's what.
Yeah. Is that yours?
That's virtually the same thing for me as well. We have a pretty robust incident response practice here. I'm with Clark Hill, and we really focus on helping companies prepare for and then respond to security incidents and security breaches. So I would say probably about 80% of my practice is we've experienced a data breach, we need some help. And then about 20% are the very lucky few who have identified this as a risk, because it's something that keeps them up at night, and they say, okay, how can we prepare for that? And then that's the rest of my practice.
Mm-hmm. So your case is either that preparation for, or the incident has happened. In your case, it's the hammer coming down.
Well, I mean, it's a nice hammer to have. I mean, somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no, if you're not going to brush your teeth, somebody has to come to you at night and say, you got to brush your teeth. You know, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, to me, I joke, it's a hygiene issue. Mm-hmm. All this stuff is that if you don't do these things, something is bad is going to happen. If you don't brush your teeth, you're not going to have teeth. If you don't do all these privacy and security issues, you're either going to have a regulator come after you, or there's going to be a breach and it's not going to be covered by insurance. Something bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And now, Jason, you're in an entirely different place because you provide IT services as well. So companies come to you looking for IT. How's the segue from the IT side to the security side manifest itself?
Well, yeah. I would say, you know, when we come in, we have some legacy clients where we still perform the IT services with. All our new business is all just managed cybersecurity, and so we have the opportunity to work with IT, whether it be internal or a lot of times MSPs. And I think from that angle, you know, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift there, where more and more IT people are understanding, kind of accepting that, okay, yeah, we need some help here, but there's still a long way to go. I think the bigger challenge that we see is the gap kind of between business leadership and IT, kind of business leaders, especially in the SMB space, where as soon as you say the word cyber or anything related, they just say, talk to my IT, right? They completely defer that responsibility, that ownership, it seems.
Yeah. Now, before I turn over to you, Leslie, and ask the same similar kind of question, the companies that come to you, do they already have an IT that they're maybe looking to replace? Do they have somebody who's been helping them, they're looking to upscale? What's that look like, that piece of, that opening introduction, so to speak?
I mean, it can vary, right? So yeah, sometimes they're going to already have IT. A lot of times they'll come to us for a particular solution. That's pretty common, where the company either, a lot of times with compliance, right? That's a great one. I know our sales folks love it when compliance is part of the equation, because it's one of those things where, they have to do it. And so, hey, we need a data loss prevention solution. Wonderful. How about one of these, and we can help them through that. The idea is, as they learn, who we are and what we do, and kind of we earn the trust, we cultivate that relationship, and eventually that kind of turns into a little bit more of that, what might be called cyber leadership, where we try to help bridge those gaps. We identify the gaps and help bridge those. And it's not just technical gaps, it's much more than that. It usually has to do with the governance, as well as just overall culture of cyber in the organization.
Yeah, and we'll come back to the legal side of governance in a bit, but Leslie, I want to turn it over to you, because you have a whole different model, of course. You're looking at things from an international perspective. You're obviously working with small businesses and all, but tell us kind of, how do organizations find you? How do they come to you, and what are they like when they get there? What's their situation typically?
Yeah, so there are a number of different ways that companies and organizations get in contact with the Cyber Readiness Institute. Some are essentially voluntold, where the sticks come in to come see the Cyber Readiness Institute as a free option for cybersecurity. So we work with a number of large organizations that want to secure their supply chain. So those companies will then come to us. Outside of that, we also will do awareness events, go work with different chambers of commerce, both in the US and outside of the US, and just raise the awareness about, yes, cybersecurity is an issue. I loved that Jason pointed out the fact that cybersecurity so often falls to IT. And that is not just a problem in the US, that is absolutely a problem globally. I have spoken to a number of different governments, large international financial institutions, and everyone, if you went to someone in HR and asked who's responsible for cybersecurity, they would say, oh, the IT guy. And that is not always the case. And my response to that is cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, whether you're in a small business or a larger business.
Yeah, and that question of who's responsible goes back to governance as well. I mean, completely. It also goes to the discussion: do you have the seat at the table? Are you listened to as the IT? Oh, you're just IT. We'll call you when we need you. Around all of that, Scott, jump in a bit if you will. When you're okay, so you get called. There's an event, breach, let's say, and you go in. We know where responsibility lies. It lies with the owners of the company or the executives of the company. What's their impression of where responsibility lies when you get in?
Well, you know what, I've got to echo what Leslie said. They very much often will ask about a cybersecurity incident, and then they turn their head to their IT guy and wonder, okay, well, what's going on, or how did this happen? In other situations, they're referring to their MSP or their managed service provider and say, oh, well, we outsource that all to our MSP. What happened? Hey, you fix it. And that can run into some problems when you're not kind of overseeing that governance. I'll give you a case in point. I'm working with a client right now. They are a small law firm. They basically outsource all their stuff to another MS service provider to kind of handle their IT stuff. Well, they had a breach. We've kind of identified the failure on the MSP side, and so now, well, they're going to fire that MSP, and they're gone, and they're replacing it, but at the end of the day, the reputational damage, the costs associated with that entire incident still ultimately lies with the client.
Lies definitely with the client.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Bob, that same question around governance and where responsibility lies, et cetera.
Well, I think one of the things that happens is that company leaders will disassociate security and privacy and those things from the core business. And they'll say, I'm responsible for the core business. I'm not responsible for these other things. That's like keeping the lights on. That's like, things that they don't really care about. However, if you looked at other areas that aren't core business per se, like human relations, ultimately that becomes an issue of the top level management. It's their responsibility. They delegate the processes to other people, but it's their responsibility. I don't see a lot of company leaders recognizing that cybersecurity, that security is another risk that they have to control. That's their job. Their job is to assess risk, to decide what risks to take and what risks not to take. It's always three categories. There's the risks that you are not going to touch. There is the risks that you're going to assume and risks that you're going to lay off. But that's what governance is supposed to do. And so I think it's an abdication of, I obviously don't have any strong opinions about this, but I think it's an abdication of their obligations. And if they do that, everyone in the whole organization looks up and says, that's not a big issue. I mean, it just, Stan, how long have you and I said that it starts at the top?
Yeah.
It's been the very first thing we said. So it's no different now.
Cyber risk is a business risk.
Right.
And the unfortunate thing is it's a relatively very new risk to business, to most businesses, right? And what we see is, I think, a lot of burying the head in the sand, right? And so that deference over to IT really is this natural reaction to that. Because they don't understand it, and I think that I think that there needs to be more, what I like to say, cyber leadership, where it's about educating and informing so that they A, understand that this risk does lie with them, and B, they are informed enough then to make those well-informed decisions, whether they accept the risk, defer the risk, mitigate the risk, or transfer the risk, or whatever, right? But it's an imperative that we figure out how to get the vast majority of business leaders to understand and then assume the responsibility.
And if I can add on to that, I mean, there's extra challenges in this particular area. Number one, many of the business leaders don't fully understand the risk itself. They have, unless they're in IT, there's all the acronyms, there's all the technical jargon, which they don't understand on one hand. So they don't understand it. Second of all, it can very much be, especially for small businesses, a black hole that they just dump money into. There's so many expensive options. They run the full gambit, and they don't often know, well, is this going to address my risk or not? And then they ask those questions to IT and even legal sometimes, and our answer has to be, well, that'll help, but it's not the end all be all. It doesn't mean that, hey, if I buy this product, I'm now safe.
It's like when I have a client, I think, said one time, said he gave them an unlimited budget and they exceeded it. Because you're absolutely, they're actually, if you or I or anyone here, or virtually were to say, well, what can you do? Well, there's an unlimited number of things you can do.
Yeah.
And so actually when we get to reasonable risk, it's actually not just reasonable security, it's what's reasonable risk. And again, that's a risk that has to be understood at the top.
Yeah. And Lessie, for you.
She's
you're
not there.
Where
Where
Lessie?
Lessie?
There you go.
There she is.
You're back on screen.
You guys back.
Looking at small businesses and infinite budgets that are exceeded. For the small businesses that you see, and you've got a program around helping them get started, your cyber readiness program. And we're proud at SecureTheVillage that we use that as part of what we do with the small businesses that come into our cohorts. To what extent do they just, this is an IT problem, let's put it off to IT, they're taking care of it, blah, 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 versus that standing up and taking responsibility. This is a corporate challenge. If you're the owner of the company, this impacts my ability to send my kids to college, to what extent do they get that versus, oh, Jason, you're IT, go take care of this, would you please?
Yeah, so that is a really great question. And I'm actually going to bring up a point that Dave Cunningham made in the session earlier when he was talking about ransomware and how long after a big attack people are still paying attention to cybersecurity. Does that really initiate a change? Yes, maybe for a few months, but it all comes down to whether you're actually building a culture around that change and not just saying, hey, I'm going to make this change for the next 6 months and then go back to normal. And I believe Robert made the point about exceeding unlimited budgets. So much of cybersecurity comes down to human behavior, and you can address a significant number of human behavior issues without expensive budgets, expensive tools, because you can add all of the technology on top of having really great human behavior and everyone knowing what their responsibility is as it relates to cybersecurity. So the Cyber Readiness Program, Stan, if you don't mind me just explaining to the audience who might not be familiar with us, we focus on 4 core issues. So passwords, software updates, phishing, and USBs, or secure file storage. And we build a playbook around those core 4 issues and essentially give these small businesses a template for how they could build out their business continuity plan and policies around all of that. So yes, it is an issue of making sure people understand the risk. And yes, if something bad happens, people are all of a sudden much more concerned. But the long-term commitment to making changes to an organization is really, I think, where it gets important. And that's where small businesses struggle specifically because they think, to Jason's point, that it is a black hole where money just gets dumped in. There are actionable steps that people can take to make changes and make sustainable changes as well.
Yeah. And when you talk culture, the same discussion here over culture, I think I'm going to make a general statement that we as Americans would rather take a pill than work out, than eat healthy, than lose weight, whatever, just can I just take a pill and then I'm okay and I can go back to what I want to do all the time instead of, why do I have to be focused on being good, working out and doing those kinds of things? I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I see a lot of that in life, and I think it applies here. It's much easier. Jason, would you put in a firewall and now aren't we secure? Like that
in
naivete?
2003, sure.
Is what?
Back in 2003, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, well, what's the 2025 equivalent of the firewall? Isn't there a silver bullet, dare I say, as I'm looking at Kim, because she and I used to go through this with our clients in Citadel for years, looking for that silver bullet?
Well, there's a silver bullet. You just don't collect any information and you air gap from the entire world.
I would say typewriters and fax machines, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's right. Erasing, disappearing ink. There's
disappearing ink.
It just doesn't work well with commerce. I understand what you're saying about the pill, and these days it's really not a pill; it's Manjaro or wherever you're doing, just jab it in your leg or something. But and that does go to your point. But how long does it take to create a habit? So, and I think going to just saying that if you can focus on, for instance, phishing alone, if you can focus on the habit of somebody stopping for just a second when they read the email and take a look at who it's coming from and whether everything's right, it just becomes a habit. And you're right. What's the chief risk in security? It's the object between the screen and the back of the chair. So if you can work on that, but again, that's ingrained habits.
And it starts at the top.
Right.
All culture really has to start at the top. And so you're absolutely right. How hard is it to get people to start? Well, it only works if the leadership wants it to,
right,
and they're willing to.
Right, because that's the culture of the firm.
Yep.
Everyone says, I'm going to do For me, it's what Bruce Shepard does, I'm going to do. Not really, but if Bruce Shepard does, if he likes that, he thinks that's important, I do too.
Yeah. Is that, Scott, I mean, do you want to add to?
Nothing else to add. I mean, I'd echo that completely. I mean, it really
Yeah.
does start there.
Yeah. So back to you, I mean, Leslie, you probably, through CRI and all the players and where you played internationally as well, you've probably seen more companies in aggregate. To what extent, even a company that goes through your program, to what extent is there a commitment to culture change versus, oh, let's go through, here are the steps of the program, let's go through them, excuse me. Let's check all the boxes, and oh good, now we're done, we can go back to business as usual. How prevalent is that?
So I would say this is where the carrots versus the sticks come in. So often people will get the certificate of completion and just go right on to business and say, oh, I did it. The company I was working with said I had to do it. But we work with a number of companies that we don't only encourage them to go through the cyber readiness program, we also have a step that requires verification that they have completed their playbook and implemented their playbook. And I would say it is probably maybe 10, 15% of our total users of the cyber readiness program actually get that verification and that final certification. So I would say you're exactly right. There's a lot of people that will just go through, quick fix it and say, oh, we've done this, and don't actually make any real changes.
So, I mean, that begs the question, what are we doing? I mean, to what extent are we changing the world? To what extent are we really upping people's game when they're simply doing it the minimum amount necessary to meet a legal or meet an insurance requirement for MFA and things like that, fill in the box if their bank asks for information, or those kinds of things. What you just talked about as well, seems to me we've got to change the narrative.
So I think if I can add on, there's
Yeah.
two situations there. One is a situation where they want to improve, but they lack the resources to do so, or they lack the resources to do so in a cost-effective manner. That's one situation. The other situation is where they, in like your case, they think, oh, it's just check the box and I'm done. For the latter, where the check and box be done mentality, it's more, I think, better education into the risks associated with that, at least at the small business level. We go to the other situation, it's identifying and helping them through certain technologies or certain processes and procedures that are effective and reasonable for their particular situation.
Yeah. And Jason, because you play down in that, the nuts and bolts of the technology, how's all this connecting to your experiences with your clients, your customers?
I mean, it varies a lot because we have some clients that I would say are very proactive when it comes to this. And I think some of it comes from that emotional part of it of almost that ego of, my company is so good and we've built this, secure by design in a way. And we need more of that. Maybe appealing to the ego of the business owner or something, but there's so many that are just all about the bottom line. It's business, right? I mean, I'm not going to complain about that, but that's the reality. But with that bottom line, being able to help kind of quantify the risk to where, with any risk management, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're investing in something into your business, you want it to positively impact your bottom line, right? That's kind of the whole point of it. And the same goes in managing and mitigating risk. So if you can quantify the risk somehow and help through that, but it's really hard to do without very intimate knowledge of the business. We're not in a position to do that as an MSSP.
Yeah.
What I will say is if a company gets attacked terribly, say a ransomware attack, irrecoverable, let's say, their IT guys are going to have a job in a week. They're going to have another job in a week. The MSP that gets fired, they're fine. They have 59 other clients. They're fine. Dust themselves off and move on. But the livelihoods of those that own the business, that have been involved in it, they're employed there, they could be devastated. And so, it makes it, that can become very real. And to me, that's one of the main reasons why business leadership needs to own and be accountable for this. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that they're on their own. There are great, smart people out there that want to help them, many of them here. But it's going to take a shift, and I don't know that it's sticks or carrots. I think it's a combination of those, but I think there has to be a way to get more of an intrinsic drive from out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've listening to the presentations today, which have been great. I think we've heard a lot of things which might drive people. And remember that whatever happens, we're dealing with individuals, we're dealing with people, so there's not going to be any one size fits all.
Right.
It's like when my clients say, well, don't you have a form of a privacy policy? I say, no, I have a template for a privacy policy. It'd be very different. You charge more for a template. But, but we've talked about the emotional characteristics of this, which are very important. I mean, we ignore those a lot. We try to make things exactly rational. Somebody has to, in the governance area, someone has to understand, what is it going to feel like to have a breach? And explain to them, that's not a good feeling. That's staying up at night wondering if you're going to, kids are going to go to college, if, you're going to be able to make your house payments. We also talked about return on investment, which is so I talked about the positive side. And people do make a point of saying, we have value, our value is greater because we have a commitment to security and privacy. And that really does lead to a commitment, because if something happens, they're going to have to pay attention to it. And I also think what you've spoken about in particular is that I think sometimes we focus, when we talk about security, we're doing it backwards. We're focusing on what you can do to make things secure without first analyzing the risk and saying, okay, and people talk, well, I don't know what the risks are. So you don't know what the risks are, but you know what the consequences of the risks are. You can say, what would happen if, no matter the reason, I could not get my data? What if I could not send out invoices? What if I could not do those things? And it forces someone to prioritize what's important in their business. And then you can say, okay, let me address those issues in my business. And I have books. My partner, Mike Gold, insists that I read these books they have formulas in them and graphs and things like that, which I became a lawyer to avoid that. But you really can measure these things. And so you can present it to people in a lot of different ways. I just think you have to do it individually and have to figure out what motivates someone.
Yeah. I think, first, well said, and I think it goes back to what Bill talked about earlier in his keynote, Bill Leiter, of engendering the conversation. It's, Kim, what you and I talked about earlier. You had mentioned that for years we've talked about cybersecurity starting with conversation. It's, okay, I want to grow my business 100% in the next 3 years, let's say. Okay, that's a great goal. What are your plans to achieve that? Great, super. Now, what are the things that can get in the way of your achieving that? Well, my top salesperson could get stolen to go to another firm. I mean, that's a risk that a business is going to have. And a business owner is going to be aware of those kinds of risks. But the risk that I won't be able to send, why wouldn't I be able to send out invoices? My IT people are protecting me. I mean, you'll get the invoices out, won't you, right? Mm-hmm. Tell me, please. that sort of thing. Or, well,
that leads to another challenge, though.
Go ahead.
Which is, and we touched on this a little bit before, but too often, business leader in a conversation around cyber risk might go to IT and say, yeah, the IT will get my invoices out. And the answer, unfortunately, will be, we're good. That's it. Yeah, we're good. Or yeah, we have backups. Or and we see that a lot. We say that a lot, and that can be the most dangerous part of it. Is when A, business leaders just defer to IT, and B, the most dangerous combination when IT accepts it and is dismissive of the risk because they don't understand it either.
When they say there's no problem, there's a problem.
Oh, huge.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yep.
not good. Funny how those comforting words turn out to be hollow.
And it's scary how often we run into this today.
We've seen that. I mean, we had, when I say we, back when I had my company, an alert came out or something. I forget the details of it. It doesn't matter. But we had the CFO ask the IT person, I think it was an MSP, I'm not sure. Maybe, it wasn't in-house. Are you covered? Whatever, what's the risk here? And we got back, oh, don't worry about it. We got it all covered. And it was right away an indication to me that they didn't know what they were talking about. Because, it's just, if you can't tell me what your most serious problem is on the network, oh, you've got it all covered? Really? You want me to believe that?
Even our best clients that have the sort of near unlimited budget, if auditor, someone came in and, not auditors so much, but yeah, if someone like a Citadel type of firm came in and said, okay, we're going to do this review, where are the weaknesses? Yeah, we'll know the top 10, okay? I'm not saying there are 10, I'm saying there's more than 10. There's always weaknesses, there's always vulnerabilities, and we're going to know those, even at our best clients that have the best budget, because it's inherently there. And it might be a heck of a lot better than some other company, the one next door, right? Is that the trick?
Yeah.
Is that the trick? To just get past that point where, that reasonable, where, it's a lot harder for a lot less likely, because we can't zero it out. We can't zero out the probability. We can't zero out the impact, but we can reduce the impact and we can reduce the probability. And there's that point that we wanted, that threshold that we can get across in both categories that I would contend would be reasonable, whatever that is. Yeah.
Well, and that goes to what Keith mentioned during the talk with Tony, that he got started in this path of reasonableness when the financial services firm he was with missed a patch out of thousands of servers, and the result was a breach, an incident, that now the regulators were all over them. Is that reasonable? You've got to be 100% covered all the time? Come on.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. You mentioned the regulators, and very often you have 1,000 different holes to kind of prevent, and the bad actor just has to find one. But then I transition that into kind of from a regulator side is, yes, you had a failure or a mistake. Maybe it's, somebody didn't apply one patch. Maybe they had a bad day or they were on vacation, whatever that reason is. At least from a regulator perspective, they often don't focus on that. They'll say, okay, well, yeah, you had a breach. That gets us in the door. Now we're going to look at what is your security compliance process. And that is what really so many of these regulator fines and penalties are associated with. Not the fact that, Joe was on vacation and forgot to do a patch, but you didn't have the policies and procedures in place to secure your systems in the first place.
Dan, I'd like to jump in here and kind of add to that point. Yes, also having the policies and procedures in place leading up to an incident is really important. But at the end of the day, it's not an if, it's a when an incident is going to happen. So especially for small and medium-sized businesses that may or may not have the funding or the expertise to build out large technology stacks to really protect themselves, having a plan for how to function, even when there is an attack, is a really big issue for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. Having that business continuity plan, knowing who to call when something happens. Yes, the legal is really important. So that's why you all are getting all of these calls. But knowing who to contact for your employees, right? And your customers. What are your next steps in the event an incident does occur, because it's really likely that in today's day and age that there will be an incident that occurs.
Yeah, and that's a big piece as well, because in some ways, it's independent of IT. I mean, the business needs, okay, who in the company has responsibility, and I'm following CRI here, by the way, in what I'm saying, but who in the company is the cyber leader, is responsible for this stuff, and is that person of the ear of the owner or the executives? I mean, that's one piece. But then all the other people, and that's simply keeping a little telephone book, if you will, of these are the people that are important. The cyber leader, who's the attorney, who's the insurance dude, who do we call for forensics, or, you know, God forbid we need you, Dave. We got Alvaca's number there. We know the right law enforcement people to call, FBI or whoever.
Well, I think most people know that, I mean, Scott and I were talking about this, that if you really do these things, you don't worry about the bulk of the incident response plan. Our incident response plan, our model, has the names of everyone you call as the front page. I don't care if anybody reads the rest. We have detailed, instructions on how to get to them and other things in there. It's important, but that's the biggest thing. Who do you call?
Yeah. Doesn't that suggest something about reasonableness then? That and again, I'll keep you in the discussion as well, as you're over my shoulder. That a key piece of reasonableness is just knowing who to call. And not just knowing it, oh, I know it up here. I happen to be away on vacation and the incident happens and it's only in my head. No, having it written down, and we're in the same company, we both know it. So if I'm not there, you can do it. If you're not there, I can do it.
What's interesting is sort of redefining what reasonable security is, because you're saying this reasonable security does not end when there's a breach.
Yeah.
Reasonable security is preparing for the breach.
And learning lessons after the breach. I would add to that as well. We're being told the time is just about up. Any questions? This is great.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I think we haven't spent enough time talking about IT. IT needs to also be supported. And the reason being is, I think back 40 years ago when I started out, I was making my own cables, I was punching down my own blocks, I was loading servers. It was a sole job for us to do something. It's my network, I set it up. And I think that's in their DNA. I've never been accused of not being heard. That's in IT people's DNA, is to take that responsibility, and they believe in their DNA that security is their job. Yes, we have to have leadership, but I think it's a community that has to step into the IT folks and say, you can't do it all anymore. You can't.
Yeah.
You can't know all the operating systems. You can't know all the configurations. You can't know all of the intrusion detection, You can't know it all anymore. And so that mind shift, to Bill's point this morning, is get them out of it's my job to it's a village. It's a community. We need the attorneys to lead us through these incidents. We need the leaders, certainly, to guide us in how much risk they want to tolerate. But extending that olive leaf to a person that's done everything themselves their entire life and still thinks it's their job, I think we need to spend more time with IT folks. Any comments?
Yeah.
Maybe we got one more question here, Stan, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was in Cloud Security Alliance AI Summit, and very interestingly, what was offered as a solution is using AI to have access to everything that employees do within the company.
No.
So
No,
basically,
just don't even think about that. I mean, 'cause the privacy implications of that are staggering. I mean, that's just, I mean, people think AI can do everything. AI probably, first of all, it's probably not AI, it's probably machine learning. There are probably only 2 or 3 things that are really AI. And AI can help with stuff, but to say that you hand it over, that's just a quick fix. It doesn't work, and it creates implications you don't want to think about.
Yes, I agree with you. But what was proposed and actually that's like the position from Cloud Security Alliance is that anything that's in the email, meeting minutes, on Slack, anything in Jira, all of that is analyzed so that anything that happens in the logs or any threat that comes through is being validated against all of the repository of what is done, by anyone in the enterprise to see if this is false positive or if this is the level of risk basically is assessed based on what's going on within organization. So for me, I think this is kind of the way to address the silos, but this is giving it to the machine to
Well,
decide.
it sounds like you're talking about more of a detection and response sort of technology, like a security operations type of automation. There's a lot of those types of solutions out there now.
Right, but it's
those are
also
pretty
like
common.
everything.
But usually they're going to be looking more at the data behind the data, the telemetry, the metadata, things like, oh, this IP address went to this IP address, this password, and so it's not so much actual human behavior, more user and asset behavior analysis. And yeah, we're going to see more and more technologies like that. Those are okay as long as it's not getting into, hey, what are my people doing? That's like an HR privacy. That's a lot of lawyers need to sit down and talk about it, sort of.
I mean, you can have AI to some degree, which just pass through whether the sender address and the return address on an email are the same, and kick those out.
Yeah.
Side of email, side of the meeting.
Yeah, I'd be worried about that, given what people do.
Yeah.
The nature of people to put extraneous information.
Yeah. Well, you can go ahead and then we'll wrap it up.
I think what they're proposing is actually going to happen to us. Because, quite frankly, human beings, at least 80% of them, are not willing or able to adjust to a digital world. We are moving from a physical world. It's easy to look at a physical person and say, it was your job to do this, you didn't do it, you're fired. Okay? But if you set up the proper protocols, and it is spying, and it is giving up a certain amount of privacy, which I hate, by the way, but the downside of bringing down our power infrastructure or all the records that we have that would lead to financial crisis and stuff like that is probably overweighing the privacy issue that we're trying to protect. And with AI, the Chinese coming in with AI, and so many people flocking to that program and allowing them to see what they're going to be doing as developers and programmers is a serious risk if you're really worried about risk in business.
All right, well, I think that's a different risk.
Yeah,
than we're talking
we should
about.
start a new conference on that.
That's right. But I don't do politics, so there you go.
Right.
Stan, if I may, we do have a very big gap for networking right after this session, and I feel like we've just gotten started. Can we stick here for another 10 minutes or so and actually talk turkey?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Truly, we are just getting started, yeah.
So I do have one recommendation, are AI policies, right? No one wants to write them. They're not in any regulations and frameworks. Everyone's completely forgotten them. People are putting in confidential financial information about personnel, about clients, all kinds of things into these AI tools. They're not being blacklisted. They're not being prevented from being accessed altogether. And the employees are sitting there, they're like, well, I've got a problem with Bob down the hall. Let me put in everything that happened and upload Bob's emails so that AI can tell me what
I
was
can't tell you
Bob's.
how often that happens to me.
But it happens all the time is the problem. And so unless we as employers provide our folks bumper guards and say to them specifically, here are your parameters, here's what you don't put in, here's what you can put in, here's what we accept, here's what we don't accept, and then we back that up with a technology restriction or enablement, this is going to continue to all snowball. 100%, right? And I think Arena's comment was kind of bridging what Kim was saying about our staff, right? Having that visibility for that person who wants to own the technology, but now getting to a point where all of the actions may become transparent to AI, and having AI almost supplement the actual ownership and accountability and deliverables of those individuals.
We have one over here. Mr. Bill.
So, backing away from AI for a moment, some of the comments earlier were really interesting. Business leaders don't understand the cyber risk, so they don't address it, or they regard it as housekeeping. And there was talk about a carrot and stick approach. What I didn't hear, and what I think needs to be injected into the discussion, is framing. How we frame an issue will have a very significant impact on how it's treated. So here's a question. What would it take to have leaders make cyber a thing that, wait, let me do it with my glasses. Okay. What would it take to have leaders make cyber a thing without ever understanding it? And one of the approaches that I have used and seen used is that we don't regard it as housekeeping, we don't regard it as peripheral. We look at cybersecurity as an integral and critical part of operational execution, which takes it out of the event category and puts it into the continuous process category. It never ends because our operation never ends. And as long as we're doing business, cyber is part of the execution. What would that conversation look like?
That's a great.
We try so hard to do that at Greenlight. I mean, we work tirelessly to try to crack that code because, it comes down to, our approach to our clients, and a lot of times we're having these meetings where we're pretty early to the table there. We've established some trust and credibility and all that, but at the end of the day, they're still kind of getting used to us, getting to know us, and usually it comes through a technical cyber risk assessment we perform, and out of it comes the readout meeting where we have that one hour with the business leaders. That's it. We get that one shot. And that might be it for the year, or who knows, right? And it has been such a challenge, but we've gotten a lot of the way there. I mean, in some ways, and it comes down to, someone had mentioned really framing it around risk rather than the technology or and so not really getting into, hey, let's put in endpoint protection, let's put in DLP, let's avoid these risks, and let's avoid these impacts, these different business impacts, right? And we're talking through those in the lens of business impact, I think has been the most helpful thing, but there's still a challenge to it. They have to actually accept the fact that they are at risk and that this is serious, and there are a lot of business leaders that still aren't there.
So if I can answer your question, the way I look at it is, I don't know if there's an end-all be-all solution. Instead, I look at it, okay, which of my companies and clients, which of those have actually integrated that into their culture and have that buy-in? And when I look at the companies that have that kind of institutional culture, there's some patterns that I've noticed. First, it's the ones that are highly regulated, and so they're almost forced to do so from a regulatory or a legal perspective. That's number one. Two, the other situation is where it is a differentiator to their competition. So consumers are recognizing security as a key and important factor, and because of that, it goes to the bottom line, it differentiates them from their competition, and so there's buy-in there. And then the third one, which is very all too common, is they have, or one of their competitors has, experienced a major breach. And they have seen that, and they've now, seen the light now. Now I recognize the risk because it's cost me hundreds or millions of dollars. And those are the three situations, at least in my experience, where, okay, now that there's buy-in, now they recognize it.
Awesome. We have one more comment over here, and then I think we can
Potential spam.
and offer back to Lessie after this.
Thank you. I work with a number of small businesses, and I see that usually their HR departments mandate that they take some sort of certification like sexual harassment training or DEI or food safety. It would be interesting if, cybersecurity, since someone said that it's everyone's responsibility, it's not just the business owner, it's not one person's responsibility, it's everyone's. It'd be interesting to see, if that was implemented where it's mandatory to train staff on cybersecurity.
It's a great idea. I mean, we do that in my firm, and it's surprising how many people fail. I think I failed once, but yeah, it's one of the things. I don't know about you. So when we help put together a mandate, we always include the training, and there are some really good training programs out there. They're non-intrusive, and then there's the follow-up where they find out if you actually learned anything, and you hit the wrong button, and it tells you. But that goes back to the human factor issue. And I think a lot of times we forget, in the love of AI, we forget about the human factor. And the human factor, you cannot defend against that.
You can move the needle, but it's not going to go.
Right, it's not going to go away. But if you train people adequately, then you're going to move that needle a good bit. But I think frankly, I'd be surprised if there aren't a lot of, it may be that it's a larger company phenomenon because they have the resources to do that, but I think it's creeping down because it's not that expensive to do it, and I think it has the benefit of actually teaching people to do something, but also I think it helps with the culture issue. But again, only if everyone does it.
So two thoughts on that. There are already some industries that require that. I think it would be better if it was widespread and specifically called out. The other thing I would say, and this goes to kind of the topic of our conference here, is that security training, in my view, represents reasonable security. And if you don't have security and training for your employees, you are not meeting that requirement.
Yeah,
in my view.
absolutely.
And there are resources out there like the Cyber Readiness Institute that offer free training.
Right.
So you can use the Cyber Readiness Institute. We have YouTube training videos that you don't necessarily have to go to like a Know Before, even though that's a really great option, just as an example. But I would agree that training is absolutely one of the most important things that you could do for changing your culture.
Yep.
And not just once a year training. Like monthly training, monthly awareness, and just regular awareness around cybersecurity and the risks.
Yeah. And additionally, promoting it with only carrots, right? Gamifying it could be helpful, has proven to be helpful in a lot of organizations, but also getting HR to put together little contests. A lot of these are measured with scores, so if you go through the training and then you don't click the simulated phishing, you have a higher score. It's kind of like a credit score that actually makes sense. And so they can leverage that and do little games, do little prizes, do little contests. That helps build culture. It doesn't have to all just come from the CEO. Like there are many things that other people in the organization, Kim's point about IT, it's a huge part of it, right? If the CEO is going to IT saying, I don't know, it's IT's job. Well, if IT says, yeah, we need to do a lot more, that sure helps, right? So we need voices. We need HR management to really care about the training and IT to really care about mitigating the risk, and financial CFO caring about what kind of cyber insurance and making sure that cyber insurance is going to pay if they have an incident, because so many times they're not actually meeting the requirements. Yes, 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 lower deductible, cool, and then they're screwed, right? And so everyone has buy-in, but it's not just a CEO, but it's kind of everyone. And maybe if we went over IT and HR and the CFO, the CEO will start to listen. Maybe it is kind of from within.
Somehow I'm hearing it takes a village.
There you go.
I think it actually takes a major metropolitan area.
This is great. We're cutting into break time, and the next panel is all about what would it take to kind of make this stuff happen. But I think part of what we're hearing is that there's a lot of necessary things to do, no one of which by itself, no subset of that by themselves is sufficient. You need the leadership, you need the training, you need IT to know what it is they're doing. You need you guys there with, here's what the law says, and here's what the regulations are, and so on. I think as well, we're going to need, and this goes into the next talk, we're going to need the media behind us, to where we're seeing more stories in the news about not just breaches, but here's a company that avoided a breach because of X, Y, Z, and W. I mean, it's some stories of heroes, not stories of just of people being victimized. Here's somebody who was approached online in what could have been a terrible romance scam thing, but saw it and stopped it right there in its track and turned the guy over, maybe to law enforcement even better. Tell hero stories. Here's a company maybe that went through a breach, but look what they've now done in response to it. I think that may become a piece of it. We have those stories as well, Lessie, for CRI as well. And I just saw Julie, it's time to go.